The border between magic and medicine has always been a bit thin, and the Renaissance of the 12th century would see a shift in medicine, especially the infusion of the medical learning of antiquity, especially folks like Hippocrates, Dioscorides, and Galen, often accompanying with them the vast Arabic tradition of medical wisdom. Thus, for the learned elite, we see a shift in emphasis from the medici to the physici, a shift that we still hear in the valence between medici, healer, which has a folk ring to it, compared to physici, physician, which still to this day touts a professional ring to it. And one of the elements traditionally thought to be cast aside in this transition to learned medicine from folk medicine was the abandonment of any whiff of magic from medical practice, something urged since the days of the Roman Galen. But in the earliest elite locus of medical professionalization, the school at Salerno in southern Italy, the role of medical incantations aren't being purged from medicine yet. They're being incorporated. Let's explore the process of this incorporation of medical incantations in the writings of one of the most important medical doctors of this early period, Urso of Salerno, and his theory and practice for the use of medical incantations. If you'd like to support this work of providing evidence-backed, free, and accessible content like this video, then I hope you consider checking out my Patreon and look at some of the cool merch we have on the channel. Your support makes all of this content possible. If you're new to the study of esotericism and you want to get the lay of the land, you want reliable sources on this stuff, make sure to check out my study guide. And if you're interested in actual historical books on topics in the occult and the mystical, check out our bookstore over at Esoterica Rare Books. You can find all those links in the description and in the pinned comment below. But now let's turn to the theory and practice of the use of medical incantations in one of the most important of the earliest professional learned medical doctors of his day, Urso of Salerno. I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and welcome to Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion. While the Renaissance of the 15th century certainly gets most of our attention, I mean, who doesn't like beautiful art, and the barrier to entry at looking at art is relatively low, you just look at it, the Renaissance of the 12th century was far more intellectually impactful. This period would see the rise of the European universities, vast translation projects, technological innovations, including the introduction of alchemy into Europe in 1111, along with the rise of scholastic philosophy and theology, and much else aside. The impacts of the 12th century Renaissance just can't be overstated, though they often are understated, but they just go deeply unappreciated because the barrier to entry is, well, poring over vast, complicated tomes in Latin, a bit different than looking at a Da Vinci painting. In the war for popular appreciation, pretty pictures will almost always best many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore to crib a poem about a bird. But not around here. We don't let that stand around here. We're really about that many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore life. And so the 12th century Renaissance also had a similar and decisive impact on the theory and practice of medicine, which introduced Greek, Roman, and Arabic text into Europe for the first time. But the introduction of learned medicine had to contend with the reality that the vast majority, virtually every other medical practitioner of the day, they were folk healers, or medici as they were called, and part of their repertoire was the use of medical incantations and amulets and other apparently supernatural healing techniques, techniques that proved apparently effective. Thus, while learned medicine was reductive in theory, all of nature could be reduced to the four Aristotelian causes. The material cause, that's earth, air, fire, and water, and sometimes the superlunar ether. Efficient causation, how something came to be. Formal causation, the morphe, the shape of the thing. And final causation, its end, All of these propelled nature into a cycle of generation and corruption, all expressed fundamentally, at least in the human body, as the ratio of four humors: blood, phlegm, black, and yellow bile, which, when out of balance, was the fundamental cause of illness, at least according to Galen. But that was a prevailing theory of at least learned medicine at the time. Such a reductive theory had to contend with the apparent success of the Medici's use of seemingly supernatural powers, not powers reduced to these four Aristotelian elements that seemed to heal people. How did they contend with this apparent supernatural powers? But learned doctors of the time, and I should say here that learned just means based on books. It certainly doesn't imply correct by any stretch of the imagination. Galenic medicine was systematically incorrect, but I guess if you're going to be wrong, it's best to be systematically wrong, like Aristotle. But these newly minted learned doctors, medieval med bros, had to deal with the apparent success of medical magic, and their answers range enormously of why this medical magic apparently worked. The first was just the orthodox Galenic position. Amulets and incantations just don't work at all, and something else is the causal mechanism for the restoration of health. We may not know what it is, but it's not magic. Others allow for the possibility of something like the placebo effect, with the amulet inspiring what we might now call psychological conditions for the restoration of health in the patient. In fact, Maimonides would actually accept a version of this position, the use of amulets that is, so long as the amulet did not contain any divine names. Those could get sullied in the medical process, and that would be a big theological no-no. Of course, another position is that the amulets and incantations worked because of demons. Of course, you saw that coming. In this position, demons afflict people with some kind of illness, with God's permission, of course, and then they induce the healer to engage in criminal magic to heal them. It's the demon causing the illness, and then basically the magic is performed, the demon removes the affliction, and all involved become convinced of the sorcery causing the healing, only to further cascade into criminal sorcery and necromancy, ultimately damning their souls. That's basically the core agenda of demons in the first place in the Middle Ages. So in this position, medical magic is just a demonic long con. But at the epicenter of the development of learned magic around Salerno in the 11th century, this integration of magic, theology, and medicine, both theory and practice, was hotly contested. In fact, the school at Salerno is just wonderfully fascinating. I mean, known for epic translations to a whole wing of women physicians, such as the illustrious Trota of Salerno. If you're in the medical profession or work in healthcare, you should study the Salerno school. It's just fascinating. But in some of the writings of the most important physicians of the time, in the writings of Urso of Salerno or Urso of Calabria, he's known by both names, we find something absolutely fascinating. Urso finds a way of threading the needle, incorporating incantations into his medical practice, rejecting both the orthodox Galenic position, but also naturalizing the activity of medical incantations so as to avoid, being burned alive for consorting with demons, as was the practice in the Middle Ages. Little is known about Urso himself. He seems to have died sometime around 1220, and he left behind 10 or so works of significant medical erudition. His works on mixtures became especially well known. However, I want to turn to his Aphorisms. This text, which was written down and then edited and glossed, provided an explanatory gloss by Urso, is an excellent glimpse into his medical theory and practice. And at Aphorism 39, we learn how he incorporated incantations into his medical practice at that time, both how they worked in theory and also to some degree how they might work in practice. Audacious Urso, as he dubs himself, he calls himself Audacious Urso, begins with a theological commonplace, that God, through miraculous causation, can inflict disease, but can also, of course, heal it. And thus any sufficiently occult disease or recovery just might be the result of divine agency in the world more generally. Further, demons, with divine permission again, also inflict illness and then apparent healing, but like I said, this is just a ploy and not actual medicine. However, he does reject the Galenic orthodoxy that incantations and amulets can have no effect whatsoever. Based on his own experience, but also a rejection that the ancients had just been correct in everything or had a complete understanding of how medicine worked. This negotiation with the medical orthodoxy of the day actually makes him a bit of a predecessor to Paracelsus, questioning the authority of Avicenna and Galen and all these medical textbooks. He's a bit like Paracelsus in this way, although of course Paracelsus is still 3 centuries out. But his aphorisms are meant to be a systematic treatise on the relationship of medical cause and effect. In his text, in fact, he contrasts his systematic approach. He likens his treatise to building a house, from the foundations to the walls to the roof, from the windows to the wall, with that of Hippocrates, which seems to just be random advice. Yeah, he's intentionally positioning himself so as to surpass Hippocrates, so it's no wonder that he calls himself Audacious Urso. Again, this is kind of Paracelsus vibes. Thus, his treatise moves from the general to the particular, beginning with the theological foundations, moving on to the generation of life, birth defects, the power of attraction and repulsion in biology, the influence of the stars on the sublunar world down here, sense perception, the nexus of the soul with the body, and even discussions of dreams and the imagination. But it's his discussion of incantations, which can be found in Aphorism 39, which luckily contains his own extended gloss that I want to dive into because, well, this is Esoterica and we talk about magic and stuff. So, medical incantations in Aphorism 39. But to appreciate that, in Galenic medicine, and especially in its uptake and transformation by the fine world of Arabic scholars, the spiritus is a very fine but still physical substance. Spiritus is a physical substance in this theory of medicine that exists within the body, which serves several incredibly important functions. The first being, of course, that it is the medium between the body and the soul. By Urso's time, 3 modes of spiritus were recognized. Vital spirit, which arose in the heart and maintains life and thus the heartbeat and respiration. It was transmitted via the pulse and replenished through inhalation. Animal spiritus arose in the brain. It was replenished by the vital spirit, which was distributed by the nerves and provides for mental and emotional faculties. The natural spirit arose in the liver and was diffused through the veins and supported things like nutrition, digestion, generation, growth, and expulsion. So 3 different modes of spiritus existed in the body. For Urso, incantations directly affected this spiritual network within the body. While the incantation can be said to work in itself, qua incantation, he actually argues that the specific word of the incantation themselves just don't have any power. The incantation works in its generality, not in its specificity. And unlike the marvelous powers of gems and herbs, the effect of the incantation is not mechanical. The effects, for instance, of the poppy to cause sleep in a patient are basically pretty consistent and pretty mechanical. But incantations are not. Well, how do we know that? Because sometimes they work and sometimes they don't work. Why? Because incantations are effective only through the degree of the meritum et fides, the merit and faith of both the doctor speaking the incantation, the manner the incantation is spoken, and the nature of the patient affected by the incantation. Specifically, we have to notice that the incantation is effective if and only if 3 conditions are met. The merit and faith of the physician along with their spiritual condition is pure. The manner in which the incantation uttered is confident. The faith and spiritual condition of the patient conforms to the process of healing. The process actually begins inside of the physician's own spiritual system. Again, recall, this is a natural, substantial system within the human body. Here, the physician has to be in a state of virtuous merit vis-a-vis the patient. That is to say, the physician must be themselves healthy, positively disposed, optimistic, confident, and driven by a genuine desire to heal the patient for their own sake, and not, for instance, to make a dollar, make a buck. It's not about making money. You have to want to help the person. Thus, the process begins with the internal spiritual merit of the physician. When the physician is in such a state, they can deploy the incantation as a series of intently pronounced words. In this process, the inner harmony of the spiritus of the physician is transmitted through exhalation via speech to the air between the physician and the patient. This air is then transformed by that speech. It's purified and made not just healthy, but now able to induce health in the patient. Recall that bad air, or miasma, remember the Latin word malaria is malaria, bad air. It was thought to induce illness. Well, it stands to reason that not only clean air, but air optimized by the merit and confidence and faith of the physician is just then the opposite of the disease-inducing miasma. And indeed Urso reasons that a physician in a poor state could actually cause malevolent spiritus to exhale and actually kill the patient or make them worse. In fact, this is exactly how he thinks the evil eye works, and how lambs and deers fall victim to the fascination of wolves, how they're a deer in the headlights, so to speak. Here, sight and sound are actually able to convey maleficent spiritus to their victim. This mechanism is even at work between teachers and students. While pupils learn little from mean-spirited teachers, but they learn a lot from teachers who are positive and enthusiastic. It's not that you're bad at math, you just had a spiritually corrupt teacher. Further, the physician has to speak the incantation with intentionality and with confidence. A half-hearted abracadabra just ain't gonna cut it. And in fact, the zone of air between the physician and the patient becomes a medium in which the salubrious condition of the physician's spiritus is transferred to the patient, and that's only possible if that zone is structured through intention and confidence. But this is all only half of the process. The body, especially the spiritus within that body of the patient, must align itself in such a way as to maximize inhaling and incorporating this purified air. This involves first having profound trust or fides, faith in the physician, along with being generally optimistically disposed toward being healed and listening to the incantation with intense concentration. Lack of trust or otherwise negative affects constrict the spiritus, and then in turn the ability of the humors to move about and harmonize themselves, restoring balance and thus health. This is especially true for the constriction of the heart. Remember, that's where the vital system actually begins, which the physician can damage through negative prognosis. If I tell you you're going to sick and you're going to die, that can accelerate your own death. This actually paralyzes the flow of the essential vital spirit. But concentrating intensely on the incantation inspires hope in the patient. Hope, and thus relaxes the flow of spiritus, and thus the harmonizing of the humors essential to health. The patient and the physician must share a common harmony, a conformity of wills around being healed and healing so as to cause a positive feedback loop to begin. In effect, this is a form of both mechanical healing with the purified air from the spiritus of the physician through their merit, in addition to any other humoral treatments that they may use, but also this is also charismatic treatment in that the confidence inspired in the patient by the physician is also required. Thus, the patient isn't merely the passive recipient of a cure, but in some sense an active participant in their own healing through a kind of concord or conformity, as Urso has it, with the healing charisma of the physician. Thus we can see why the exact nature or wording of the incantation just doesn't matter a lot, just as long as it inspires, literally inspires through inhaling health and well-being. This is good bedside manner, but at an almost metaphysical, indeed magical register. But Urso detects something like this process affecting health in a wider range of ways. For instance, it explains why a partner in a long-standing marriage will die when the other partner health falls ill. They can also perish. One person dies, the other person dies, because they're connected through this medium of air. Their health is actually part of the literal air they generate for each other. Further, this is also why traveling can be so noxious to one's own health. In your own homeland, you breathe the air, you eat the earth, you drink the local water. You are literally part of your homeland and removed from that homeland, taking in foreign air, food, and water and other substances. It's literally disagreeable to one's spiritual constitution, and thus it's likely to induce illness. Homesickness is literally that for Urso. It's a sickness born from not being in your homeland. Further, this is also why martyrs and warriors can prove insensitive to torture and injury. Their singular focus on their future beatitude or on victory, as their spiritus is so concentrated that it actually leaves their bodies numb to the sensation of injury. In this sense, they've basically enchanted themselves. Unsurprisingly, the unceasing prayers of the martyrs and the battle cries of the warriors themselves function as incantations. Further, Urso compares and contrasts other important forms of ritual uses of speech. Unlike, for instance, incantations, which rely on both the merit and faith to be effective, the sacraments don't rely on the merit of the priest. Contra the old Donatist heresy of Augustine's day, the priest need not be sinless or otherwise pure to perform the rite through which God transforms the wafer into wine and the body into the blood of Christ. Thus, faith alone is sufficient. However, exorcism does, to some significant degree, rely on both the merit and the faith of the exorcist and the faith of the energumen, that's the possessed person. Yes, there is a word for a possessed person. They're called an energumen. And something is similar with the necromancer, actually, though in the opposite direction. While faith is required, albeit a strange faith, a faith that demons can help you, the lack of moral merit or even the presence of sin may encourage demonic assistance. And this perverted and spiritually sick condition of the physical body even allows demonic powers to be all the more effective as they deceive and doom the would-be sorcerer. Even a minor wound inflicted with sufficient malice and hatred can be lethal, while a major injury delivered by an honorable foe can actually be healed relatively easily. Thus, Urso uses his theory to great effect, comparing and contrasting and analyzing a wide range of magical, medical, and even spiritual forms of cause and effect in terms of sickness, injury, and healing. But ultimately, the Galenic orthodoxy carried the day. Incantations and amulets were overwhelmingly struck from the theory and practice of learned medicine, at least until Paracelsus came and kicked the door in. But why? It has everything to do with that whole pesky business of learning, learned medicine. If at some level you can just charismatically heal people, then why spend years and years and years reading all these ponderous books, memorizing charts of critical days, learning complicated astrological timings for bloodlettings, and all these complicated humoral regimes? If incantations are so effective, just get really good at doing those, and you'll have both the folk healers and the other learned practitioners of medicine, you'll have them out of a job. Further, while Urso makes the mechanics of incantational healing seem mechanical, the practice discovered that, well, just like he said, they're wildly inconsistent. Thus, a physician like Maimonides would allow their use, and specifically in the case of amulets here, but only in addition to standard treatments of sickness. Thus, the amulets and the incantations either became superfluous, they became theologically suspect, or they were just redundant. But when they were used, by this time a totally new understanding of magic stood behind them. Around the time of Urso's writing, again we're talking about the 12th century Renaissance, this would also see the importation of brand new developments of learned magic into Europe. Magic itself was undergoing substantial renovation in the form of learned magic, book magic. Here, astral and talismanic magic, as developed primarily in the Islamic context, it simply supplanted Urso's theory of spiritus infusion in magical theory with the theory of astral rays. Thus, by the time Urso's theory emerged, it was already losing the competition over magical theory, in which it would ultimately be lost and he would be largely forgotten. Even in the history of medicine, Urso of Salerno is a pretty obscure figure. I mean, his Wikipedia entry is a robust 3 sentences. But I'm glad to cover this important aspect of his work, and this channel ain't called Esoterica for nothing. Regardless, Urso's theory of incantations in Aphorism 39 of his Aphorisms provides a fascinating insight into the intersection of early medieval magic and medicine. But Unless you read German, you're not going to be able to read much of Urso's writings because they're primarily done in German, which is strange considering that he was Italian. However, van der Lugt does actually have a wonderful, wonderful article which provides the text, translation, and a brilliant analysis just of Aphorism 39. But of course, more on magic and magical theories to come. Until then, thank you for watching Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, religion, and apparently medicine.